Deacon Wright had exactly 13 minutes to pick up Zoe from Mrs. Henderson's house before the woman started charging overtime $50 he didn't have in his wallet, wouldn't have until Friday's paycheck cleared. The November sky had already surrendered to dusk, that particular shade of purple that made the roads feel lonelier than they were. Route 9 stretched empty ahead, the kind of empty that came with living 40 miles outside Albany, in a town most people only knew as an exit sign on the interstate. The headlights caught the patrol car, first hazards blinking in that urgent rhythm that made Deacon's hands tighten on the steering wheel. A figure in uniform leaned against the cruiser's hood, one hand pressed to her forehead. Even from a distance he could see the dark stain running down her wrist. Deacon's foot eased off the gas. Every instinct he'd honed over 36 years screamed the same warning: black man. White cop. Dark road. Nothing good comes from mixing those three ingredients. But she was bleeding. He pulled onto the shoulder gravel crunching under his tires. Through the rearview mirror, he watched Zoe's head lift from her coloring book. "Stay in the truck, baby." "Why, Daddy?" "Because I need you to. Can you do that for me?" Zoe nodded her fingers, already returning to the purple crayon she'd been using to color a dragon's wings. 7 years old, and she still trusted that the world made sense, that people helped each other when help was needed. Deacon wanted to keep it that way as long as possible. The cold hit him the moment he stepped out, the kind that bit through a work jacket and reminded you winter didn't care about your heating bill. He kept his hands visible, palms open at his sides as he approached. 30 feet. 20. Close enough now to see her face clearly. The ground shifted beneath him. Eleanor Bishop. 12 years collapsed into nothing. 12 years since he'd stood in a cramped Albany apartment, a ring hidden in his jacket pocket, rehearsing words he'd never gotten to say. 12 years since he'd come home to find her closet empty, her toothbrush gone, every trace of her erased, as if she'd never existed. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her hand dropping from her forehead. Recognition flickered across her features. Shock. Maybe fear. Definitely something more complicated than he could name. "Deacon." Her voice carried the same crack it had that last night when she'd said they needed to talk and then disappeared before dawn. He forced himself to focus on the blood instead of the memories. "You're hurt." "My car died. I called for backup, but—" She gestured at the radio mounted to her dash. "Dead. Someone rear-ended me about a mile back, hard. When I got out to check the damage, they reversed and took off." Deacon scanned the cruiser. The back bumper hung at an angle, one taillight shattered. Professional hit-and-run or drunk driver, either way, not his problem. He should offer to call someone, get back in his truck, drive away. "Let me take a look at the engine." The words came out before he could stop them. Elena hesitated, her eyes darting to the passing cars, few and far between, but each one slowing just enough for the drivers to crane their necks to catalogue this scene for later gossip. A black man standing beside a disabled patrol car, a white female officer watching him. Deacon felt the weight of their assumptions pressing against his shoulders like physical things. "You don't have to." "I know." He walked to his truck, moving deliberately, every gesture designed to telegraph innocence to anyone watching. Zoe had pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass in little clouds. "Is the police lady okay?" "She's fine. I'm just going to help her with her car." "Can I come see?" "No, baby. Stay right there." He retrieved his toolbox from the bed, its metal handle cold enough to sting his palm. When he turned back, Eleanor had popped the hood. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture rigid in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Thank you for stopping. I know you didn't have to." Anyone would have. They both knew that was a lie. Deacon leaned over the engine, his hands finding familiar territory despite the years since he'd worked on patrol cars. The alternator belt had snapped clean break, probably worn through over time rather than sabotage. He could replace it in 10 minutes if he had the right part. Without it, he could rig something temporary. "Looks like the alternator. I can get you running, but you'll need to take it to a mechanic tomorrow." "How long will it take?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. Elena glanced at her watch, then at the darkening sky. Deacon understood the calculation happening behind her eyes. Every minute on this roadside was another minute of exposure, another opportunity for this situation to be misread, misreported, twisted into something dangerous. "I don't want to keep you from wherever you were going. I was picking up my daughter. She can wait a few more minutes." The mention of Zoe seemed to shift something in Elena's expression. Surprise, maybe, or something softer that Deacon couldn't afford to examine too closely. He focused on the engine instead, his hands working through the familiar motions of jury-rigging a temporary solution with what he had in his toolbox. The work gave him something to do besides look at her. 12 years had left their marks, lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness in her jaw that spoke of decisions made and regretted. She'd cut her hair shorter, no ring on her finger. The uniform fit her like she'd been wearing it long enough to forget she had it on. All set. Turn her over. Elena slid behind the wheel. The engine caught on the first try, settling into a rough idle that wouldn't last more than a day or two, but would get her back to the station. She stepped out, and for a moment they stood in the space between their vehicles, the ghosts of everything unsaid, hovering in the cold air between them. "Thank you." "Don't mention it." Deacon gathered his tools, ready to end this encounter before it could become something more complicated. But then Zoe's voice cut through the twilight, bright and unburdened by the weight of history. "Daddy, I'm hungry. You said we'd get ice cream." Despite everything, the years, the hurt, the careful walls he'd built, Deacon felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. Eleanor laughed, a short sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "Ice cream in November. She's persuasive. I can see that." Eleanor took a step toward the truck, bending slightly to wave at Zoe through the window. The girl waved back enthusiastically, her coloring book forgotten. "Hi there. What's your name?" "Zoe. I'm 7 3/4. "That's very specific." "Daddy says being specific is important." Eleanor straightened, and when she looked at Deacon again, some of the professional distance had dissolved from her eyes. What remained was harder to read recognition, certainly, but threaded through with something that looked uncomfortably like regret. "She's beautiful. I'm lucky." The words hung between them, carrying implications Deacon hadn't intended, but couldn't take back. Elena opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. "Deacon, The explosion of sound cut her off. Gunfire, 2 shots in rapid succession, close enough that Deacon felt the second one tear through the air where his head had been a moment before. Eleanor's training kicked in faster than conscious thought. She shoved him toward the ground, her service weapon already clearing its holster. "Get down!" Deacon's body moved on instinct, but his mind was locked on the truck, on Zoe. He could see her small silhouette through the window, frozen in her seat, her coloring book falling to the floor. Eleanor fired 3 times at the black SUV that had materialized from the darkness, its headlights off, until the moment it accelerated past them. The vehicle's rear window shattered, but it didn't slow. Within seconds, it had vanished around the curve, tail lights disappearing like they'd never existed. "Get in my car! Now!" Elena was already moving her weapon, still drawn, her eyes scanning the road for a second attack. Deacon ran for his truck. Zoe had dropped to the floor the way he'd taught her during their drills, the ones he'd hoped she'd never need to use outside of practice. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Daddy." "I'm here, baby. We're okay. But we need to go with the police lady." "Why?" "Because it's safer."
"Can you be brave for me?"
Zoe nodded, but her hand trembled when she reached for him. Deacon scooped her up, her small body shaking against his chest, and ran for the patrol car. Eleanor already had the back door open, her head on a swivel tracking every shadow. "Get in!" Deacon climbed into the back seat, Zoe still clutched against him. Eleanor slammed the door and threw herself behind the wheel. The cruiser's engine roared as she accelerated, leaving Deacon's truck abandoned on the shoulder. Blood from her forehead wound, dripped onto the steering wheel, but her hands remained steady. Who were they? "I don't know." "That's not an answer. It's the truth." Eleanor's jaw clenched. She grabbed the radio, the dead radio, and swore under her breath. Then she pulled out her personal cell phone, dialing with one hand while the other gripped the wheel. "This is Lieutenant Bishop. I need backup on Route 9, mile marker 43. Shots fired." Suspect vehicle is a black SUV, possibly a suburban rear window, damaged, heading north toward... She paused, listening to whatever response came through. Deacon watched her face in the rearview mirror, watched the way her expression shifted from urgent to confused, to something that looked like fear. "No, I understand. Yes. I'm bringing in a civilian witness now." She hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire had. "They're not sending backup. They're sending it to the station. Chief wants to debrief us there." The way she said chief made Deacon's instincts flare. He'd spent enough years navigating hostile systems to recognize when someone was being corralled rather than protected. "Your chief knows someone just tried to kill you. That's what I told him. And he's not sending units to track down the shooter." Elena's hands tightened on the wheel. She ran through 2 red lights without slowing, her focus fixed on the road ahead. Zoe had stopped shaking, but she remained pressed against Deacon's side, one small hand fisted in his jacket. The Millbrook police station materialized from the darkness, a squat brick building that had probably been modern in the 70s and hadn't been updated since. 3 patrol cars sat in the lot. Through the lit windows, Deacon could see figures moving inside. Eleanor pulled into a spot near the entrance, killing the engine, but not immediately getting out. She stared at the station doors like they led somewhere she didn't want to go. "I need to warn you about something." "Warn me about what?" "My father, Chief Roland Bishop. He's difficult." That was when Deacon understood. Eleanor hadn't just disappeared 12 years ago. She'd been disappeared, sent away by a father with enough power to make a young black mechanic's life hell if he asked too many questions. The $5,000 Dorothy had received, the vague threats, the sudden job loss, it all crystallized into a pattern. "He's the one who paid off my mother." Elena's eyes met his in the rearview mirror. She didn't deny it. "I didn't know about that until years later. By then I'd already—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that he's going to ask questions. A lot of questions. About why I was on that road. About how you happened to be there. About why we're together. Because you needed help. That's the truth. But he won't care about truth." The station door opened. A man in his mid-60s stepped out, tall, solid, with the kind of presence that came from decades of authority, rarely questioned. He wore a chief's uniform pressed so crisp it could cut, and his eyes found the patrol car immediately. Chief Roland Bishop had the look of someone who'd built an empire in a small town and intended to keep it. Eleanor took a breath, squared her shoulders and opened her door. Deacon did the same, keeping Zoe close. The moment his feet hit the pavement, Roland's attention shifted to him with laser focus. "Elena." The chief's voice carried the kind of warmth reserved for damaged property. "Thank God you're safe. I got your call. Who's this?" "He saved my life, Dad." "I asked who he is?" "Deacon Wright." Roland's face remained neutral, but something flashed in his eyes. Recognition calculation, old anger, resurfacing. He knew the name. Of course he knew the name. "Wright. The mechanic." Not a question. An accusation wrapped in professional courtesy. "Yes, sir." "You were on Route 9. Picking up my daughter from the babysitter. Saw the lieutenant's car broken down. Stopped to help." How convenient. The word hung in the cold air, sharp as a blade. Eleanor stepped between them, her posture shifting into something more professional, more distant. "Dad, someone just tried to kill me."
Can we focus on that?
"We will. Inside. Mr. Wright, I'll need a statement." It wasn't a request. Deacon felt Zoe press closer against his leg, her small hand finding his. She might not understand the words, but she understood the tone, the same one teachers used when they'd already decided you were guilty, the same one store managers used when they followed you through their shops, the same one cops used when they wanted you to know your place. "Of course." They walked into the station together, but everything about the formation was wrong. Eleanor in front, Roland beside her, Deacon, following with Zoe, clinging to him, not a rescue party, but a perp walk, dressed up in polite words. The interior matched the exterior, dated, functional, designed more for intimidation than comfort. A handful of officers looked up when they entered, their gazes sliding from Elena to Deacon with the kind of professional neutrality that police used to hide their real thoughts. Deacon catalogued each face, each expression, looking for allies and finding none. "Elena Medical. Get that head checked. Right this way." Roland gestured toward an interview room, windowless, institutional, the kind of space designed to make people feel small. Deacon hesitated. "My daughter can wait in the break room. Officer Kane." A black officer in his early 40s appeared from a side office, his expression carefully blank when he saw Deacon. But something flickered in his eyes. Not hostility, not quite sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The kind that came from seeing yourself in someone else's situation. "Take care of the child. Get her something to drink." "Yes, Chief." The officer Kane approached with his hands visible, his movements deliberately unthreatening. He knelt to Zoe's level. "Hey there. I'm Detective Luther Kane. What's your name?" "Zoe." "That's a pretty name. You like hot chocolate, Zoe?" She nodded, looking up at Deacon for permission. He squeezed her hand. "Go with Detective Kane, baby. I'll be right in that room. I can see you through the window." He pointed to the break room visible through a large observation window, close enough to watch too far to help if something went wrong. Zoe's grip tightened. "Promise. Promise." Luther extended his hand. After a moment, Zoe took it, letting him lead her away. Deacon watched until she was safely in the break room, until he saw Luther pointing to the hot chocolate machine with an easy smile that seemed more genuine than the situation warranted. Mr. Wright. Roland's voice pulled him back. The chief stood in the doorway of the interview room, patient as a spider. Deacon walked in. The room was exactly what he'd expected: metal table bolted to the floor, hard chairs on either side, a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Roland gestured to the chair facing the mirror, the suspect's chair, and took the one opposite. You understand this is just a formality? We need to document everything. I understand. Good. Tell me what happened. Start from when you first saw the lieutenant's vehicle. Deacon recounted it methodically, keeping his voice level, his hands visible on the table. He knew how this worked. Every word would be weighed for inconsistencies, every gesture analyzed for signs of deception. He gave Roland nothing to work with. And the vehicle that shot at you? You didn't get a license plate? It was dark. They came from behind, lights off. But you're sure it was an SUV? Black Suburban, maybe an Escalade, late model. You know cars. Again, not a question. Deacon waited. You said you were a mechanic. Where do you work? I own a garage. Wright's Auto Repair, about 5 miles outside town. Your own business? That's impressive for someone with your background. The words landed exactly as intended. Roland hadn't said criminal background, hadn't made any explicit accusation. But the implication sat between them like a third person at the table. I've worked hard. I'm sure you have. Tell me, Mr. Wright, did you know my daughter before tonight? Here it was, the question that would determine whether this stayed a witness statement or became something more dangerous. We knew each other 12 years ago. Knew each other how? We dated. Roland's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Dated. For how long? About a year. And when did this relationship end? When she left town without telling me where she was going? A muscle twitched in Roland's jaw. He leaned back in his chair, studying Deacon with eyes that had probably broken stronger men than him. Must have been quite a shock seeing her again tonight. Yes, sir. Some might say too much of a coincidence. There it was. The accusation hiding behind professional courtesy, the suggestion that Deacon had somehow orchestrated this encounter. He kept his hands flat on the table, his breathing even. I stopped to help someone who needed it, that's all. Just a good Samaritan. My mother raised me to help people when I can. Your mother? Dorothy Wright, correct. She took you in when you were 15. She did? After you'd been through several foster homes? Yes, sir. Roland pulled a folder from beneath his arm, thin but present. He hadn't come to this interview unprepared. You had some trouble as a teenager. Shoplifting, vandalism, one arrest for auto theft that was dropped. I was innocent of the auto theft. The charges were dismissed. Dismissed isn't the same as innocent. Deacon's hands wanted to curl into fists. He forced them to remain still, forced his voice to stay calm.
Is there a question, Chief? Just trying to understand the kind of man who stops to help my daughter on a dark road. The kind of man who has a history with her. The kind of man who happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Wrong place, wrong time from where I'm sitting. Roland smiled, thin, cold, utterly without humour. Where you're sitting is up to you, Mr. Wright. You can sit here as a witness who helped an officer in distress, or you can sit here as a suspect in an ongoing investigation. I'll give you one guess which one makes your life easier. The door opened. Luther Kane stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Chief, the lieutenant is asking to see Mr. Wright. I'm not finished. She's insisting, sir. Said she needs to give him something before he leaves. Roland's eyes never left Deacon's face, searching for a reaction to tell anything he could use. Deacon gave him nothing. Fine.
We'll continue this conversation later. Am I free to go? For now, stay available. I'm sure I'll have more questions. Deacon stood his legs stiff from sitting too still for too long. He walked out of the interview room, following Luther through the station to a small medical bay where Eleanor sat on an exam table, a bandage covering the cut on her forehead. The moment she saw him, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. I need you to take this. What is it? Insurance. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. If anything happens to me, if I don't contact you within 48 hours, give this to the FBI. Not local police. FBI. Deacon's hand closed around the drive. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with implications he couldn't yet see. What's on it? Everything. Before she could elaborate, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Eleanor's hand shot out, gripping Deacon's wrist. I'm sorry. For 12 years ago. For disappearing. For all of it. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just scared. Elena. If I could take it back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is try to make it right now. Deputy Vincent Nash appeared in the doorway, 50s, the kind of solid that had turned to heaviness eyes that tracked Deacon's every movement with professional suspicion. Mr. Wright, I'll need that statement now. He already gave his statement to the chief. Chief wants it documented by someone who wasn't personally involved. Elena's grip on Deacon's wrist tightened for a moment, then released. Her eyes met his, conveying something urgent he couldn't quite decode. Trust me. Be careful. Both. Of course. The kitchen clock read 1:47 a.m. when Deacon finally slid the USB drive into his laptop. Zoe slept upstairs exhausted from a night that had stolen her innocence in small, irreversible ways. Dorothy sat across from him at the scarred wooden table, her arthritic hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold an hour ago. You should have kept driving. She was bleeding Mama Dot. And now you're involved in something that's going to bleed you dry. Dorothy's eyes held no anger, only the weary knowledge of someone who'd watched this pattern repeat too many times. That girl brought nothing but trouble 12 years ago. She's bringing it again. It's not her fault someone tried to kill her. Isn't it? The question hung between them as the laptop struggled to life its fan, whirring with the effort of machinery past its prime. Deacon had built this life through caution, choosing which jobs to take, which bars to avoid, which conversations to exit before they turned dangerous. He'd constructed a fortress of careful decisions around himself and Zoe, and in one moment of compassion, he'd opened the gate. The USB contained 47 audio files, each labeled with dates spanning the past 9 months. Deacon clicked the first one. Static, then voices clear enough to identify, distant enough to suggest hidden recording equipment. The first voice belonged to Roland Bishop. Nash, we have a problem. Eleanor's digging into the Kowalski accident. She found the payment records. Vincent Nash responded, his tone worried. She's your daughter. You can't. I can and I will do whatever's necessary. Prep the documentation. If she doesn't stop, we'll have to remove her from the equation. Dorothy's tea mug hit the table hard enough to chip. Deacon held up a hand, clicked the next file. More conversations, each one building a mosaic of corruption so vast it made his stomach turn. Construction contracts awarded to the lowest bidder regardless of safety standards. Payoffs to building inspectors. Accidents covered up families bought off with settlement money that came with ironclad NDAs. 7 deaths over 8 years. Each one ruled accidental. Each one conveniently clearing the way for Bishop Construction to increase profits by cutting corners that OSHA would have flagged in minutes. Stefan Kowalski. Dorothy's voice was barely audible. I remember reading about that. They said he was drunk on the job, fell 4 stories from scaffolding that wasn't properly secured. He wasn't drunk. How do you know? Deacon clicked another file. This one contained a coroner's report, the real one, not the sanitized version released to the public. Stefan Kowalski's blood alcohol level had been 0. The scaffolding had been assembled with substandard materials, missing critical safety bolts that should have been standard on any job site. Bishop paid the coroner to falsify the toxicology. Lord have mercy. Deacon kept clicking, kept listening, each file adding another layer to a conspiracy that reached deeper than he'd imagined. Names emerged from the recordings, contractors who'd been squeezed for kickbacks, inspectors who'd looked the other way for cash payments, a network of complicity that stretched across 3 counties. The methodical documentation of it all suggested Eleanor had been planning this confrontation for months, maybe longer, gathering evidence with the patience of someone who knew she'd only get one chance to make the accusations stick. File 17 contained a conversation between Roland and someone identified only as the Albany contact, discussing how to handle a state labor investigator who'd started asking uncomfortable questions about Bishop Construction's safety record. The solution involved compromising photographs and a transfer to a different region. The investigator's questions had stopped immediately. File 23 was shorter, more chilling. Roland's voice cold and measured. The Volkov family is getting persistent. The wife hired a lawyer. Vincent Nash, what do you want me to do? Make the lawyer understand that pushing this case would be bad for his health and worse for his career. Be subtle. We don't need more attention. 3 days later, according to Elena's notes attached to the file, the lawyer had withdrawn from the case, citing conflicts of interest. Mrs. Volkov had accepted a settlement that was a fraction of what she deserved, signed an NDA, and disappeared from public view. The final recording was dated 3 days ago. Roland Bishop's voice cold and measured. She's not backing down. I gave her a chance to walk away. Vincent, you know what needs to be done. I don't like this, Chief. She's your daughter. She stopped being my daughter when she chose to betray me. Make it look like an accident, tonight if possible. The recording ended. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the ancient refrigerator's death-rattle hum and the sound of Dorothy's breathing shallow and quick, with the kind of fear that came from understanding exactly how dangerous powerful men could be when cornered. He tried to have her killed. Dorothy closed her eyes, her weathered face collapsing into lines that age had carved, but fear was deepening. And she came to you for help. Deacon, that man owns half this town. The police, the construction contracts, probably judges and city council members we don't even know about. If you go against him, I'm already against him. The moment I stopped on that road, I chose a side. Then unchoose it. Take Zoe and leave. Tonight. I have money saved enough to get you both somewhere safe, somewhere he can't reach. Running won't fix this. Staying will get you killed. Deacon thought about Zoe upstairs, about the drills he'd taught her, how to drop to the floor when she heard gunshots, how to call 911 and give their address clearly, how to hide in the bathroom with the door locked until she heard his voice. What kind of world required a 7-year-old to know those things? What kind of father prepared his child for violence instead of protecting her from the knowledge that violence existed? Mama Dot, 12 years ago, a man with power made me disappear from Elena's life. Threatened you, threatened me, made me vanish like I was nothing, like I had no right to love who I wanted to build a future on my own terms. His hands flattened against the table, against the grain of wood he'd sanded and refinished himself when he bought this farmhouse 8 years ago. Every scar in that wood told a story. The burn mark from when Zoe had tried to help make breakfast at age 4, the deep gouge from when he'd dropped a wrench while repairing the kitchen sink, the water stains from the leak he'd fixed last winter. This table was his history, his proof that he could build something solid from broken materials. I can't live my whole life being erased by people who think they own the world just because they've gotten away with evil long enough to believe it's normal. And I can't teach Zoe that the right response to injustice is to run and hide. Dorothy reached across the table, her weathered hand covering his. Her skin felt paper-thin, fragile in a way that reminded him she was 73 and had already survived more than most people endured in 2 lifetimes. I know, baby. But revenge and justice, they're not always the same thing. Sometimes revenge dresses itself up in justice's clothes and convinces good people to make bad choices.
This isn't revenge. This is making sure no other family loses a father because Roland Bishop wanted to save money on safety equipment. This is 7 dead men who deserve to have their truth told. And what about Zoe? What happens to her if Roland decides you're too dangerous to let live? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them could put out. Before Deacon could answer, a knock shattered the moment's sharp, urgent wrong for this hour. His hand went instinctively to the drawer where he kept the unloaded pistol, the one he'd bought after the 3rd break-in attempt in his first year at the farmhouse, but had never actually chambered because he feared what having a loaded weapon in a house with a child might cost him. Dorothy was fast to her eyes, already on the window. It's her! Eleanor stood on the porch in civilian clothes jeans that looked lived in, a dark sweater with a small stain near the collar, running shoes that had seen better days. She looked smaller without the uniform, more vulnerable, like someone who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten how to stand still. The bandage on her forehead was fresh, professionally applied, which meant she'd stopped somewhere between the police station and here to get medical attention without leaving a paper trail that could be traced. Deacon opened the door but didn't invite her in, his body blocking the entrance in a way that was protective of his space and the people inside it. How did you find my address? I've always known where you lived. The admission came with a wince, like it hurt to say out loud. I needed to make sure you were okay, that Zoe was okay. We're fine. You should go. Dorothy's voice came from behind him, sharp as winter wind. 12 years too late for explanations, girl. Elena's eyes found Dorothy over Deacon's shoulder. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that looked like shame, mixed with the kind of grief that came from confronting the damage you'd caused and finding it worse than memory had preserved. Mrs. Wright, I know you have every reason to hate me. I don't hate you. Hate takes energy I don't have to spare. But I don't trust you either, and trust, once you break it, it doesn't heal clean. It heals crooked, full of weak spots that crack under pressure. I understand. Deacon stepped aside, not quite welcoming her, but not blocking her way. Eleanor entered her movements careful, like she expected the floor to collapse beneath her feet, or someone to tell her she didn't belong here, had never belonged here. They migrated to the kitchen, the only room warm enough at this hour, and stood in an awkward triangle around the table where the laptop sat closed, hiding its terrible revelations. I listened to the files. Deacon gestured at the laptop, its screen now dark. Your father ordered your death. Not in some abstract way, not as a theoretical possibility. He gave Vincent Nash explicit instructions to make you disappear. I know. You knew before tonight. I suspected.
I've been building this case for 9 months. Started noticing my shifts getting changed without explanation, my requests for certain files being denied, emails I'd sent disappearing from the server. 3 weeks ago, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing stolen, but things were moved. Drawers opened and not quite closed all the way. Papers shuffled through my laptop's position on my desk, shifted by maybe 2 inches. Like they were searching for something specific. Dorothy's arms crossed over her chest, her body language closing off in the way it did when she was protecting herself from caring too much about someone who'd already proven they could hurt people she loved. And you led them straight to my grandson? No. I didn't know Deacon would be on that road tonight. I didn't plan any of this. The breakdown was real, the shooting was real, the panic was real.
But you used him anyway. Handed him that USB drive, made him part of your war without asking if he wanted to enlist. Elena's composure cracked just slightly, just enough to show the fear beneath the trained officer exterior. Her hands trembled before she forced them still, and her voice when she spoke carried the weight of someone who'd been having this argument with herself for hours. You're right. I had no right to involve him. But when those shots were fired, when I realized my father was willing to kill witnesses just to get to me, when I understood that Vincent Nash would put bullets in anyone who saw what happened. Her voice broke. She steadied it through visible effort, the kind that left marks you couldn't see but could feel. I couldn't go to anyone in the department.
Can't go to the FBI because there's at least one agent on my father's payroll. Walter Briggs, 20-year veteran, retired to Ireland last year with $3 million in assets on a government salary that maxed out at $90,000. The DA's office is a joke. Half of them owe their elections to Bishop Construction donations. So yes, Mrs. Wright, I used your grandson. I gave him evidence that could destroy my father, and I did it because he's the only person I've ever known who kept his word, even when it cost him everything. The admission landed in the kitchen like something physical, something they all had to step around to keep moving forward. Deacon felt the weight of that statement, the implication that she'd been watching, tracking his life from a distance, while he'd forced himself to stop looking for her to build a life that didn't include the ghost of what they'd almost had. What happened 12 years ago? The real story, not the version you told yourself to make leaving easier. Elena sank into one of the kitchen chairs, uninvited, her shoulders curving inward like she was trying to fold herself small enough to disappear to take up less space in a room where her presence felt like an accusation against everyone who'd moved forward while she'd been stuck. I was pregnant. The words landed like a physical blow. Deacon's knees went weak, but he locked them, refused to show how much that revelation cut, how it reopened wounds he'd thought were scarred over enough to handle anything. Dorothy's hand found the back of Elena's chair, steadying herself against furniture that suddenly seemed insufficient to hold the weight of this confession. I found out 6 weeks before I left. We'd been talking about the future, about maybe moving in together after you finished your certification program. I bought a test on my lunch break, took it in the bathroom at the precinct. Stupid reckless, but I couldn't wait. Couldn't stand another minute of not knowing. Dorothy's expression softened fractionally, her anger warring with unwanted sympathy with the memory of her own moments of terror when possibilities became certainties and the world shifted on its axis. 2 pink lines. I stared at them for 20 minutes, sitting on that toilet in a bathroom that smelled like industrial cleaner and fear. And my first thought wasn't panic or worry about what this would do to my career, to my life. It was joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. I was happy, Deacon. I wanted that baby, wanted the life we'd been building, wanted to see what kind of person we could raise together. So why did you run? Because my father found the test. I'd thrown it away in my apartment trash, wrapped it in newspaper, like that would somehow make it invisible. But he came by unannounced. He had a key, always had a key, said it was for emergencies, but really it was about control. And he went through my garbage like he had every right to monitor what I threw away, to audit my life for evidence of choices he didn't approve of. Eleanor's hands twisted together, knuckles white with pressure that had nowhere else to go. He sat me down at my kitchen table and laid out 2 options. Option 1, I could get an abortion, never see you again, and he'd make sure you got a good job, maybe even help you buy that garage you wanted. He'd set you up for success, he said, make sure you had opportunities that would have taken you years to build on your own. Option 2, I could keep the baby, stay with you, and he would destroy you. Not just fire you from Bishop Construction that had already happened the week before, though I didn't know he'd orchestrated it until much later. He would plant evidence. Drug charges, maybe theft. Something that would stick, something that would put you in prison for years. Deacon's voice came out strangled raw, with the kind of pain that 12 years hadn't been enough to dull. You could have told me. We could have faced it together. I was 23 years old, pregnant and terrified. My mother had died when I was 16, cancer that ate her from the inside out over 18 months, while my father threw money at treatments that delayed the inevitable but couldn't stop it. She was all the softness in our family, all the warmth. When she died, the house became a mausoleum where my father and I walked around each other like ghosts. He was the only family I had left, and he made it clear, choose him or lose everything. So you chose him.
I chose to protect you. And I know how that sounds, like a coward making excuses, like someone who took the easy path and then spent years constructing elaborate justifications for why it was actually the noble choice. But Deacon, you were already under a microscope. How many times did you get pulled over for driving through white neighborhoods? How many times did store security follow you around like you were planning to shoplift? You were working twice as hard as anyone else just to be seen as half as trustworthy, half as competent, half as deserving of basic respect. She looked up at him, eyes red but dry, like she'd cried so much in the past 12 years that tears had become a luxury she couldn't afford. I knew what having a mixed baby out of wedlock would do to you in this town. The looks, the whispers, the assumptions that you'd gotten some white girl pregnant and trapped her, that you were irresponsible or predatory or both.
People already questioned whether you were good enough for me. I heard it in my father's friends' voices when they met. You saw it in the way they sized you up, like you were a problem that needed solving. A baby would have cemented their prejudice into concrete truth, given them ammunition they'd use against you for the rest of your life. Dorothy's voice cut through, unexpectedly gentle. So you left to spare him. I left because I was weak. I told myself it was noble that I was protecting him, but really I was protecting myself from having to fight my father, from having to choose between the only parent I had left and the man I loved. I was protecting myself from having to be strong enough to withstand the pressure, brave enough to say that our future mattered more than his approval. The word hung in the air, loved, present tense, masquerading as past, revealing more than Elena probably intended. I drove to Pennsylvania. Got a job waitressing in a town where nobody knew me, where I could be anonymous. Found a free clinic for prenatal care, started taking vitamins, reading books about what to expect. I was going to keep the baby, raise it alone, build a life that didn't include either you or my father. I was going to prove I could be strong enough to do the right thing, even if I'd done it the wrong way. Elena's breath hitched her composure, fracturing in ways that exposed the grief she'd been carrying alone. 8 weeks later, I started bleeding. Made it to the ER, but by then it was too late. They said these things happened, that it wasn't my fault, that maybe it was for the best, given my circumstances. The nurse who said that last part, she meant well, thought she was offering comfort. But all I could think was that the universe had punished me for my cowardice by taking away the one thing that had made me brave. Jesus. Dorothy's hand found the back of Elena's chair, not quite touching her, but close enough to offer the possibility of comfort if Elena needed to reach for it. I should have come back then. Should have told you, should have faced what I'd done and accepted whatever consequences came with it. But I couldn't. The guilt was eating me alive, and I convinced myself you were better off without me. Better off with someone who wouldn't bring that kind of pain, that kind of complication. Someone who wouldn't remind you every day of what you'd lost without ever knowing you'd had it. Deacon had to sit. His legs finally gave out, and he dropped into the chair across from Elena, his mind trying to process 12 years of missing information, 12 years of a parallel life where he'd been a father, almost where he'd lost a child he never knew existed. The mathematics of grief was strange. How could you mourn something you'd never known? But the loss felt real anyway, felt like a weight that had always been there, but he'd never had a name for until now. You had no right to make that choice for me. I know. You took away my chance to fight for you, for us, for that baby. I know. Do you? Deacon's voice rose, the control he'd maintained all night, finally fracturing under the pressure of revelations that kept reshaping the past into something he didn't recognize. Do you have any idea what it did to me when you vanished? I thought I'd done something wrong. Thought maybe I'd pushed too hard, moved too fast, said something that scared you away. I replayed every conversation, every moment, looking for the thing that made you run. I blamed myself for not being enough. Deacon. I bought a ring. Did you know that saved for 8 months, worked every overtime shift I could get, skipped meals to put money aside? Planned this whole thing, dinner at that Italian place you liked, the one with the candles in wine bottles and the waiter who always gave you extra breadsticks. Then a walk through Washington Park at sunset. I had the ring in my pocket the night you said we needed to talk. And then you were gone, and I spent the next year wondering what I'd done to make you leave. Elena's composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down her face, her hands covering her mouth like she could physically hold back the sobs, like she could stuff the grief back down where it had lived for 12 years, hidden but never gone. I'm sorry. God, Deacon, I'm so sorry. I know those words aren't enough, will never be enough, but I don't have anything else to offer except the truth that I've been carrying like a stone in my chest for 12 years. Dorothy moved, then surprising them both by putting a hand on Elena's shoulder. Not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement of shared pain, recognition that grief bound people together even when it was the only thing they had in common. The baby. Boy or girl. They couldn't tell. Too early. Just a possibility that never got the chance to become real. The three of them sat in the wreckage of confession, the laptop screen dark between them, the evidence of Roland Bishop's crimes momentarily forgotten in the face of more personal devastation. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old farmhouse windows in their frames, reminding them that the world kept moving forward even when individual lives ground to a halt. Finally, Deacon spoke, his voice hoarse from emotion he'd been suppressing. "Why come back now? Why this town, this job after everything?" "My father had a heart attack 2 years ago. Survived, but it slowed him down. Made him think about mortality, about what kind of legacy he was leaving. He called me for the first time in 10 years, said he wanted to make amends before he died, that he was sorry for driving us apart, sorry for being so controlling, sorry for all of it." Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing tears across skin that looked raw from crying. "I came back because I wanted to believe people could change, that maybe we could find a way to be a family again, even if it was broken, even if the cracks showed. I took the job at Millbrook PD because it was close enough to be convenient far enough that I wouldn't have to see him every day, wouldn't have to confront the ways he hadn't actually changed as much as he claimed. And then you found the evidence. A year ago, young construction worker named Dmitry Volkov fell from a crane. 24 years old, married 6-year-old daughter with blonde pigtails and her father's eyes. The preliminary report said operator error combined with intoxication. But when I went to notify his wife when I saw that little girl, her name was Anya, and she cried for her daddy in Russian and English both, like maybe one language would bring him back if the other didn't work. I couldn't walk away, couldn't file the paperwork and move on, like it was just another accident, another unfortunate incident in a dangerous profession. Elena's jaw set with something harder than grief, something that looked like determination forged in the fire of too many compromises. I started pulling files. Old accidents, closed cases, deaths that had been ruled accidental but felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate at first. Found a pattern. 7 deaths in 8 years, all at Bishop construction sites, all ruled accidental, all with toxicology reports that seemed just slightly off. Workers who supposedly showed up drunk to operate heavy machinery despite having clean records, and families who swore they never touched alcohol on the job. So I started recording conversations, documenting inconsistencies, building a case against my own father. And when he found out, tonight's ambush was his answer. His final attempt to solve the problem of a daughter who wouldn't stay quiet, who wouldn't accept that some truths are better left buried. Footsteps on the stairs made them all freeze. Zoe appeared in the doorway, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest, her eyes puffy with interrupted sleep and the confusion of a child who knows something is wrong but doesn't have the vocabulary to name it. "Daddy," I heard yelling. Deacon's heart cracked. He'd tried so hard to keep his daughter's world safe, to shield her from the ugliness he'd grown up navigating, to give her the childhood he'd never had. Now that ugliness sat at his kitchen table, wearing his past's face, demanding attention, that would reshape everything. "Sorry, baby. We were just talking. Adult stuff. Come here." Zoe padded across the cold linoleum, climbing into his lap, with the ease of someone who'd never doubted she was wanted, who'd never had to question whether her presence was a burden or a blessing. Eleanor watched them with an expression Deacon couldn't quite pass, longing mixed with regret, mixed with something fiercer, something that looked like determination, not to let her own mistakes poison this child's chance at safety. "Is that the police lady?" "Yes. This is Miss Eleanor. She's an old friend." Zoe studied Eleanor with a child's unfiltered assessment, taking in the tears and the sadness with the kind of directness that made adults uncomfortable. "You were crying." "I was. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're sad about things that happened a long time ago." "What are you sad about?" Elena glanced at Deacon, asking permission with her eyes. He gave the smallest nod, trusting her to calibrate the truth for a 7-year-old's comprehension. "I'm sad because I made some mistakes when I was younger, and now I'm trying to fix them, but fixing things is hard when they've been broken for a long time." Zoe considered this with the gravity that children bring to concepts they don't fully understand, but recognize as important. "My teacher says when we make mistakes, we have to say sorry and try better next time." "Your teacher is very smart."
Are you going to try better? I'm going to try my hardest. That seemed to satisfy Zoe. She nestled against Deacon's chest, her elephant's trunk dragging across his shirt, leaving a small trail of moisture from where she'd been chewing on it, a habit she'd supposedly outgrown, but returned to when stressed. Daddy, are we in danger? The question, so direct, so knowing, hit Deacon like cold water. He'd underestimated how much she understood, how much those drills had taught her about the fragility of safety, about the ways the world could hurt people who didn't deserve it. We're okay right now, baby. But we might not be okay later. Dorothy intervened, her voice gentle but firm. Baby girl, your daddy and I are going to make sure you're safe. That's a promise we're making to you right now. But tomorrow, you're going on an adventure with me. We're going to visit Reverend Patterson. Remember him from church? He has that big dog you like. Bear. That's right, Bear. And we're going to stay there for a few days while your daddy helps Miss Elena fix the mistakes she was talking about. Can I bring my coloring books? You can bring anything you want. Zoe allowed herself to be led back upstairs, casting one last curious glance at Elena before disappearing. The sound of Dorothy's uneven footsteps, arthritis making every step an effort she refused to acknowledge or complain about, faded into the upper floor, leaving Deacon and Elena alone with the weight of everything unsaid. What's your plan? Deacon asked when the house had gone quiet again. I have 48 hours before my next shift. I've called in sick, said I need to recover from the accident and the trauma. In that time, I need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it, someone outside my father's reach, someone he can't buy or intimidate or threaten into silence. Who? U.S. Attorney Margaret Holloway, Eastern District of New York. Her husband died in a construction accident 5 years ago, different company but same pattern of negligence, same corners cut for profit, same lies told to grieving families. She's built her entire career on taking down corrupt contractors who value money over human life. Deacon pulled the USB drive from his pocket, held it up to the light. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction, so much potential for justice or disaster depending on whose hands it ended up in. And you trust her. I trust that she hates what my father represents more than she could ever be bought off. I trust that personal vendetta, when aimed at the right targets, can accomplish what institutional processes can't. That's the best I can offer, not perfect certainty, just calculated probability that she'll do the right thing. What happens after you hand this over? After the investigation starts, after the arrests are made? My father gets arrested. The FBI investigates Bishop Construction, probably finds connections we haven't even discovered yet. Vincent Nash goes down as an accessory to multiple homicides. Families get justice, maybe some financial compensation, though no amount of money brings back the dead.
And I...
Eleanor's voice caught betraying emotion she'd been trying to suppress.
I lose what's left of my family. My father will hate me for the rest of his life, however long or short that life is, once he's in federal prison. Whatever relationship we might have salvaged, whatever hope I had for reconciliation, it dies the moment I hand over that evidence. But I'll finally sleep at night knowing I did the right thing, even if it cost me everything. Deacon thought about Zoe's question. Are we in danger? The truth was, yes, they were. Roland Bishop had built an empire on silencing threats, and Deacon had just become one by accepting that USB drive, by listening to those recordings, by knowing what he now knew. But silence had a cost. 7 families who'd never gotten justice, 7 men who'd died because profit mattered more than safety, because one man's greed was considered more important than multiple men's lives. I'll help you get to Holloway. What? You can't go alone. Your father's watching you. The moment you leave town, he'll know. He'll have people tracking your movements, anticipating your next move. But if we go together, if we're careful, if we plan this right. Deacon, I can't ask you to do that. You have Zoe to think about. You have a life here. I've already taken too much from you. I can't take your safety too. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. He stood, decision made, with the kind of finality that came from understanding there was no other choice that let him sleep at night. But we do this smart. We plan every step. We account for every variable we can control. And we keep Zoe completely out of it. How? Mama Dot takes her to Reverend Patterson's place tomorrow morning. Old friend of the family lives 30 miles south in a town where nobody knows about Bishop Construction or cares about small-town politics. Nobody thinks to look there. Zoe stays safe while we finish this. Elena rose slowly, like someone testing newly healed bones to see if they'd bear weight. Why are you helping me? After everything I did, everything I took from you, every way I hurt you, why? Deacon moved to the window, looked out at the farmhouse property he'd bought with money, earned through caution and compromise, through choosing safety over risk at every opportunity.
3 acres of carefully maintained sanctuary of controlled existence, of a life built on the principle that the best way to survive was to avoid fights you couldn't guarantee you'd win. But what was safety worth if it came at the cost of watching good people suffer while bad people prospered? 12 years ago, you made a choice to protect me from a fight you thought I couldn't win. It was the wrong choice, made for complicated reasons I'm trying to understand. Made from fear and love in proportions I'll probably never fully untangle.
He turned back to face her, meeting her eyes with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but might eventually grow into it if they both survived what came next. But right now, 7 families are living with losses they didn't deserve, believing lies your father fed them about drunk workers and operator error. They're carrying guilt that isn't theirs, blaming their dead for accidents that were murder dressed up as negligence. And you're the only one brave enough or broken enough to speak truth to power that's been unchallenged for too long. Eleanor crossed the distance between them, stopping close enough that he could see the individual tracks. Tears had carved through her makeup, close enough that he could smell the soap she'd used and the fear she was trying to hide. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you helping me. Don't deserve a second chance I haven't earned. Probably not. But deserving and needing aren't the same thing. And right now what you need is someone who's willing to stand next to you when you face your father. So that's what I'm offering, not absolution, not reconciliation, just solidarity in doing something that needs to be done. Her hand rose, hesitant, uncertain, trembling slightly from exhaustion or emotion or both, and came to rest against his chest over his heart. Deacon didn't move, didn't breathe, just let the moment exist in all its impossible complexity, all its unresolved history, all its uncertain future. I never stopped. Don't. His voice was gentle but absolute, cutting her off before she could finish a sentence that would change everything in ways neither of them was ready for. Don't say something we can't take back. Not yet. Not until this is over and we know we're both going to survive it. Eleanor's hand dropped. She nodded, understanding the boundary, even if it hurt to respect it. When do we leave? Tomorrow night. Gives Mama Dot time to get Zoe settled at Patterson's. Gives me time to prepare to make arrangements with Luther about what happens if this goes wrong. 8 p.m. Be ready. Dorothy's voice floated down from upstairs. She's asking for you, Deacon. He looked at Elena one last time, trying to reconcile the woman standing in his kitchen with the ghost that had haunted his memories for 12 years, trying to understand how someone could be so different and so familiar simultaneously. There's a motel 6 miles north. The Crossroads Inn. Stay there tonight. Don't use your credit card, they can track that. Pay cash. Keep your phone off except for emergencies. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 8 p.m. Okay. Eleanor. He waited until her eyes met his. The person you were 12 years ago made choices out of fear. The person you are now is making choices out of courage. Whatever happens next, whatever this costs us, remember that difference. Hold on to it when things get hard. She left through the back door, disappearing into November darkness that felt less like night and more like held breath before a storm breaks. Deacon watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then locked the door and climbed the stairs to where Zoe waited, already half asleep again, but needing the reassurance of his presence. Dorothy sat in the rocking chair beside Zoe's bed, her weathered face looking every one of her 73 years in the dim light from the hallway. You're really going to do this? It wasn't a question. I am. Can't talk you out of it. No, ma'am. Dorothy stood with effort, her joints protesting the movement, with sounds only she could hear, but that Deacon could see in the way she braced herself against the chair arm. She gripped his arm not for support, but for emphasis, for connection, for the physical contact that said what words couldn't always convey. That child upstairs is watching everything you do, learning how to be in this world from how you move through it, learning what matters, what's worth fighting for, what lines you draw and what lines you cross. So make sure whatever you're teaching her is worth the cost. Deacon looked at Zoe's sleeping face, peaceful in ignorance of the forces gathering against them, innocent in ways he couldn't protect forever, but wasn't ready to surrender yet. I'm teaching her that running away from hard things doesn't make them easier, that sometimes the right choice is the dangerous one, that her father doesn't abandon people when they need help, doesn't look away when injustice is happening right in front of him just because fighting it might be uncomfortable or costly, even when helping them might destroy you, especially then. Because if she grows up watching me choose safety over principle, comfort over courage, what kind of person does she become? What kind of world does she think we live in? Dorothy pulled him into a fierce hug.
her small frame somehow containing more strength than seemed possible, more love than he'd ever felt worthy of receiving. Your mother, your birth mother, the one who gave you to the system when she couldn't take care of you anymore, she would be proud, terrified, angry at you for taking unnecessary risks, probably trying to lock you in the basement until you came to your senses, but proud underneath all that. Proud that her son grew into a man who stands up even when standing down would be easier. What about you, Mama Dot? I'm always proud of you, baby, even when you make me want to lock you in the basement myself until you come to your senses, even when you're doing something that scares me more than anything I've faced in 73 years of facing scary things.
They stood that way for a long moment, grandmother and grandson, both knowing tomorrow would crack their careful world open, but unable to choose anything different, unable to be people who looked away when looking closely, revealed truths that demanded action. Downstairs, the laptop had gone to sleep, its screen dark. Deacon woke it, copied the files to 3 separate drives with methodical precision. One for Holloway, one for Luther, one for insurance he hoped he'd never need to use, but couldn't risk not having. Each drive was a potential end to Roland Bishop's reign, each one a bomb that could detonate the careful structure of lies and intimidation he'd built over decades. Then he deleted everything from the original USB, leaving it blank, worthless, a decoy that would reveal nothing if Roland's people found it. If they came looking for evidence, they'd find an empty drive that proved only that Elena had given him something not what that something contained.
The real evidence would be scattered, protected, impossible to destroy all at once. That was the key redundancy distribution, making the truth resilient enough to survive attempts to suppress it. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its voice carrying across the frozen fields with a clarity that only winter nights could provide. Deacon turned off the kitchen light and stood at the window, watching shadows that might have been threats, or might have been trees moving in wind that was picking up, promising a storm system moving in from the west. Either way, the time for careful had passed. Tomorrow, they'd take the fight to a man who'd spent decades believing he was untouchable, who'd built his power on the foundation of other people's fear and silence. Deacon just hoped they'd survive the discovery that he was wrong. They pulled out of Luther's driveway at exactly 3:47 p.m., the November sun already surrendering to early darkness, the sky that particular shade of grey that promised snow before morning. Deacon drove with careful precision, not too fast to attract attention, not too slow to seem suspicious, maintaining exactly the kind of boring respectability that made law enforcement look past you. Eleanor sat rigid in the passenger seat, Luther's service weapon heavy in her lap, her eyes scanning every vehicle they passed with the intensity of someone who understood that danger could come from any direction. The plan was simple in theory. Head north initially toward Plattsburgh, make it obvious enough that anyone tracking them would report the direction and commit resources to that route. Then loop west through back roads, come at Albany from an angle Roland wouldn't anticipate.
Simple in theory, complicated by the reality that Roland Bishop had spent 30 years building a network of eyes and ears across 3 counties. 15 minutes into the drive, Luther's voice crackled through the first burner phone. "You've got a tail. Black Explorer, 3 cars back. Been following since you left my neighborhood. Ran the plates Bishop Construction assigned to their security department." Deacon checked the rearview mirror with practiced casualness. Sure enough, a dark SUV maintained perfect distance, close enough to track far enough to avoid obvious suspicion. The kind of surveillance that only worked when the target didn't know they were being watched, which meant their window of advantage was already closing. Vincent, or one of his crew. Doesn't matter who's driving. They're not trying to hide anymore, which means Roland's done pretending. This is about a concerned father trying to help his troubled daughter. This is a hunt now. Elena twisted in her seat, confirming what Deacon had already seen. "How long until they make a move?" "Depends on how patient they are. Right now, they're probably hoping you'll lead them somewhere isolated, somewhere without witnesses. Then we make sure that doesn't happen." They drove through farmland gone dormant for winter, past houses where families were settling into Saturday evening routines, dinner preparations visible through lit windows, children playing in yards despite the cold, the ordinary rhythms of lives unburdened by the knowledge that 2 fugitives were passing within yards of their normalcy. The sign for Whitlock Lake appeared ahead 15 miles. Eleanor leaned forward, recognition sparking in her eyes. "I know this area. There's a fork in the road about 2 miles ahead. The main route goes left to the lake quarter-mile dead end. But there's a service road that goes right, loops back through State Forest to Highway 87. Most people don't even notice it's there." "Can we lose them?" "Better. We can trap them, make them commit to the dead end while we take the loop." It was a gamble dependent on timing and the assumption that whoever was following them didn't know the terrain as well as Elena did.
But continuing with a tail would be slow-motion suicide. Eventually they'd make their move, and eventually Deacon and Elena would run out of road, out of options, out of time. Talk me through it. Elena's cop training kicked in, her voice taking on the clipped efficiency of someone executing a tactical plan. The fork's not obvious. Looks like the main road just curves naturally to the left. We need to commit to that curve, sell it completely, then cut right at the last possible second. If they're focused on us instead of the road, they won't react fast enough. 1 mile. The forest thickened on both sides, evergreens, blocking out what little light remained, creating the illusion of a tunnel leading toward inevitable confrontation. Deacon's hands were slick on the steering wheel despite the cold. Everything depended on the next 60 seconds. 1/2 mile. He could see the fork now, barely visible in the gathering dusk. The main road curved left with confident signage pointing toward Whitlock Lake Recreation Area, while the right branch looked like maintenance access, unpaved and uninviting. When I say go, grab the handle and don't let go. Eleanor's hand found the grip above the passenger door. Ready. Deacon committed fully to the left turn, his brake lights flashing as if he was slowing for the curve, giving every indication that he was following the main road toward the lake. The Explorer followed, closing the gap, now sensing their prey was trapped, that the dead end ahead meant nowhere to run. At the last possible second, the moment when physics said commitment was irrevocable, Deacon yanked the wheel hard right and floored the accelerator. The truck fishtailed, rear wheels losing traction on loose gravel before finding purchase. Tree branches scraped both sides with sounds like fingernails on chalkboard, like the forest itself was trying to stop them. Eleanor braced herself against the dashboard, her weapon still in her lap, ready for the possibility that their pursuers would recover faster than anticipated. Behind them, the Explorer's driver reacted too late, committed to the left turn by momentum and surprise. Deacon caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Brake lights flaring the SUV, trying to correct, but unable to fight physics disappearing around the curve toward the dead end. Deacon didn't slow to confirm. He kept the accelerator pinned, dodging potholes and fallen branches by instinct more than vision. The truck's suspension protesting every impact with sounds that suggested expensive repairs ahead, if they survived long enough to worry about such things. 2 minutes of controlled chaos, tree trunks appearing in the headlights with terrifying suddenness. The service road barely wide enough for the truck every turn, threatening to send them into a ditch or wrapping around an oak tree. Then the road widened, smoothed, began its promised loop back towards civilization. Deacon eased off the gas, his heart hammering against his ribs hard enough that he could feel his pulse in his throat. Did we lose them? Eleanor checked the side mirror. Nothing but empty road and darkness. For now. But they'll radio our direction. We bought maybe 20 minutes before Roland redirects resources. The burner phone rang Luther, his voice tight with controlled panic. What the hell just happened? Vincent's on the radio saying you tried to run him off the road, that you're driving erratically, possibly under the influence or experiencing a psychotic break. We lost a tail. Didn't run anyone off the road, we just declined to be followed to somewhere isolated enough for Vincent to make us disappear. Deacon listened carefully. Vincent just declared this an active pursuit. He's calling in every favor Roland has with law enforcement in 3 counties. Every cop, every trooper, every local sheriff's deputy is going to be looking for your truck within the next 15 minutes. Eleanor and Deacon exchanged glances. The full weight of Roland's institutional power was about to come down on them like a hammer. How long until roadblocks? 20 minutes, maybe less. And that's assuming they set them on main roads. If Vincent gets creative, deploys officers at back road intersections, you could run into one any second. Then we ditch the truck, go dark. It's 40 miles to Albany. You can't walk that. We won't walk it all, just far enough to get past the immediate net. Luther was silent for a moment, understanding what Deacon was suggesting, but needing deniability. There's a rest stop 12 miles from your current position. Route 87 northbound. Public place, lots of vehicles. If someone were to arrive there before the alert goes wide, they'd have options. Understood. Deacon, be smart. Don't be a hero. Heroes get buried, and Zoe needs her father alive. The call ended. Deacon pushed the truck harder, racing against the clock and the machinery of law enforcement, turning its full attention toward 2 people who'd become inconvenient truths. They reached the rest stop with minutes to spare. Deacon's phone lit up with an emergency alert as they pulled into the lot. Bolo. Armed suspects in stolen vehicle. Do not approach. Call 911 immediately. They're calling the truck stolen now, making anyone who sees us think we're dangerous criminals. Effective strategy. Turns every citizen into potential surveillance. The parking lot was half full. A prefabricated building surrounded by cars whose owners were inside using bathrooms, buying coffee, checking phones for messages. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 2 fugitives were parking between a minivan and a sedan, using them for visual cover. We need something that won't attract attention, Deacon said, scanning the lot. Not too new, not too old. Out-of-state plates if possible. Elena assessed vehicles with professional efficiency. There. Silver Honda Accord New Jersey plates, soccer mom bumper stickers. It's invisible in its ordinariness, exactly the kind of car police look past. Can you start it without keys? Elena pulled a small leather case from her pocket lockpick tools that spoke to preparation Deacon didn't want to examine too closely. I've been planning my escape from my father's reach for 9 months. You learn skills. They moved quickly.
Deacon kept watch while Elena worked the door lock with movements so practiced they looked effortless. 30 seconds later, the door clicked open. 2 minutes after that, the engine turned over, settling into the smooth idle of a well-maintained vehicle. They were rolling out of the parking lot in a stolen Honda Accord when Luther's voice came through the burner phone one last time. Your truck just pinged on a traffic camera heading north. They're repositioning assets. You've got maybe an hour before they realize you switched vehicles. We'll make it count. Deacon, whatever happens, you did the right thing. Remember that when this gets hard. The call ended. Deacon drove the speed limit hands at 10 and 2, projecting the kind of boring suburban normalcy that made law enforcement look past you. The Honda handled differently than his truck lighter, more responsive, built for highway commutes rather than farm roads. But it was anonymous in ways his truck could never be.
Eleanor pulled out the second burner phone and dialed a number from memory, her fingers steady despite everything. Margaret Holloway's office. The voice was professional, clipped, unimpressed by weekend calls from unknown numbers. I need to speak with Attorney Holloway. It's urgent. It concerns Bishop Construction and evidence of multiple homicides. Ms. Holloway doesn't take unsolicited calls, especially on weekends. If you have information relevant to an ongoing investigation, you can submit it through proper channels on Monday morning. Tell her it's about 7 workplace deaths that were covered up and falsified. Tell her I have audio recordings of the CEO ordering those deaths concealed. Tell her I'm Lieutenant Eleanor Bishop and my father is trying to kill me to keep this quiet. Silence. Then, hold, please. The wait stretched long enough that Deacon thought they'd been disconnected. Finally, a new voice, older, carrying the kind of authority that came from decades of prosecuting people who thought themselves above the law. This is Margaret Holloway. Identify yourself and explain why I'm taking this call on a Saturday evening when I should be having dinner with my family. Lieutenant Eleanor Bishop, Millbrook Police Department. My father is Roland Bishop, CEO of Bishop Construction. I have 47 audio files documenting criminal conspiracy spanning 8 years. Falsified death investigations, payoffs to building inspectors and coroners, intimidation of witnesses. 7 men are dead because he cut safety corners to increase profit margins. Those are serious accusations against a man with an excellent reputation in the construction industry. Stefan Kowalski fell 4 stories because scaffolding wasn't properly secured. Dmitry Volkov was crushed by a crane that hadn't been maintained. 5 others died in accidents that were entirely preventable if basic safety standards had been followed. And when I tried to investigate, when I refused to let their deaths be written off as drunk workers making mistakes, my own father ordered Vincent Nash to kill me. Eleanor paused, then delivered the line she knew would penetrate Holloway's professional detachment. Your husband died in a construction accident 5 years ago. Different company, same pattern of negligence. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The silence that followed was different, personal, painful, weighted with old grief. Where are you now, Lieutenant? En route to Albany. We should arrive by midnight if we're not intercepted before then. I have a witness. Someone my father can't intimidate or buy off. Someone willing to risk everything to make sure this evidence reaches someone who can't be corrupted. Holloway's voice shifted, becoming tactical rather than skeptical. Come to my home address. I'll text it to this number within 5 minutes. Don't use your personal phones. Don't stop for anything unless you're being pulled over by marked police vehicles, and even then call me immediately before complying. I'll have federal agents waiting to ensure your safety. Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. If your evidence is as damaging as you claim, you've just started a war with a man who has decades of practice winning them. Wars have casualties. Make sure you're prepared for that reality. The call ended. Eleanor slumped in her seat, the tension that had held her upright suddenly released. We did it. We got through to her. We got through to her office. Getting there alive is the hard part. As if summoned by the words, blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror, a state trooper accelerating toward them with purpose. Deacon's hands tightened on the wheel. Elena. I see it. The trooper pulled alongside them. Young officer, maybe late 20s, expression serious but not hostile. Their eyes met for a moment that stretched impossibly long. Deacon prepared for the worst, the siren the order to pull over the end of their run before they'd reached safety. Then the trooper accelerated past them, disappearing into the darkness ahead, responding to some other emergency that had nothing to do with a stolen Honda or two fugitives racing toward justice. Eleanor released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. False alarm. This time. Eventually our luck runs out. They drove through darkness that felt less like night and more like the space between breaths that pause before something breaks or heals or changes irrevocably. The highway stretched ahead, leading toward a woman who might save them, or might be one more disappointment in a long line of people who'd chosen comfort over courage.
The address Holloway texted led to a colonial house in a quiet Albany neighborhood, tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the kind of upper-middle-class respectability that came from decades of professional success. Lights blazed from every window despite the late hour. 3 unmarked sedans sat in the driveway, their occupants clearly federal rather than local. Deacon parked 2 houses down. "We walk from here. Less attention." They approached on foot, hyper-vigilant, every shadow potentially hostile. A man in a dark suit stepped from beside Holloway's front porch, his posture and bearing screaming federal agent even before he spoke. "Lieutenant Bishop?" "Yes." "Special Agent David Morrison, FBI. Attorney Holloway is waiting inside. We'll secure your vehicle and sweep it for tracking devices."
The house's interior was warm, professionally furnished, but lived-in photos of Holloway, with a man who must have been her late husband, law books, lining built-in shelves, the accumulated evidence of a life built on pursuing justice. Holloway herself stood in the dining room, late 50s, iron-grey hair pulled back in a no-nonsense style, eyes that had seen too many families destroyed by corporate negligence and refused to look away. "Lieutenant Bishop, Mr. Wright." She shook their hands with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "Let's see what you have." Deacon handed over the USB drive. Holloway plugged it into a laptop already set up on the dining table, 2 more FBI agents flanking her with notebooks ready to document everything. The first audio file played. Roland Bishop's voice filled the room, cold and measured. "Nash, we have a problem. Eleanor's digging into the Kowalski accident. She found the payment records."
Vincent Nash responded, worried. "She's your daughter. You can't." "I can, and I will do whatever's necessary. Prep the documentation. If she doesn't stop, we'll have to remove her from the equation." Holloway listened without speaking, her expression hardening with each file. After 3 recordings, she looked up, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "This is authenticated. You can verify chain of custody. I recorded every conversation myself over 9 months using equipment I purchased with cash. Each file is time-stamped and cross-referenced with my case notes. The coroner's reports, financial records showing payoffs, witness statements from 3 construction workers. It's all documented and verifiable." "And you're prepared to testify in federal court to face cross-examination from attorneys who will attack every aspect of your credibility?" "Yes, I'm prepared for whatever it takes." Holloway turned to the agents. "Get the U.S. attorney on the line. Now." "I don't care that it's Saturday night. I want arrest warrants drafted before midnight." "Ma'am, the warrant process takes time." "I don't care. Roland Bishop has been covering up workplace deaths for 8 years. His daughter has evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and racketeering. We move now, or he'll have time to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and build a defense that could take years to penetrate." One agent pulled out his phone and stepped into another room. Holloway turned back to Elena, her expression softening fractionally. "Your father will claim you're mentally unstable, that you fabricated this evidence during a psychotic break brought on by PTSD from the shooting incident. His attorneys will be skilled, aggressive, and very well funded." "I know. That's why I have 3 construction workers willing to testify about safety violations they witnessed. That's why I have Deacon as a witness to tonight's events, the shooting, the pursuit, my father's attempts to silence me."
It's a start. But we'll need more. We'll need the financial trail verified by forensic accountants. We'll need the original coroner's reports, not just the falsified versions. We'll need testimony from the inspectors your father bribed, and that means offering them immunity deals. Holloway's fingers drummed the table, her mind already working through prosecution strategy. "This is going to take months to build properly, maybe longer. Your lives as you knew them are over. You understand that..." Deacon spoke for the first time since entering the house. "We understand, but 7 families have been living with lies for years. Whatever it costs us to give them truth is worth paying." Holloway studied him for a long moment, then nodded with something that looked like respect. "Agent Morrison will take you to a safe house. Federal protective custody until we can execute arrests and secure your safety. That means no contact with family or friends except through secure channels. No social media, no phones except the ones we provide. You'll essentially disappear until trial." Elena reached for Deacon's hand. "What about his daughter?
She's 7 years old staying with family. She needs her father. We'll bring her into protection too. Anyone connected to either of you becomes a potential target once Roland realizes what's happening. Your mother, Mr. Wright, she'll need to come in as well. The reality of it settled over Deacon like a weight. Zoe ripped from the only home she'd ever known. Dorothy forced into hiding at 73. Their entire lives upended because he'd stopped to help someone on a dark road. But 7 men were dead. 7 families deserved truth. The math still favored justice. The next 3 hours blurred into organized chaos. FBI agents verified audio files, cross-referenced financial records, contacted the construction workers Elena had interviewed months ago. Holloway made calls that pulled federal prosecutors from dinner parties and weekend getaways, building the case in real time. At 11:47 p.m., she hung up from her final call and looked at Elena and Deacon with an expression that mixed exhaustion with satisfaction. "We have enough for arrest warrants. Roland Bishop, Vincent Nash, and 4 others in the Bishop Construction executive team. The U.S. Attorney is convening a grand jury Monday morning, but we'll execute the arrests tonight." "Tonight?" Eleanor's voice carried surprise and relief in equal measure. "Your father thinks he has time, that you're running scared that he can hunt you down before you become a real threat. That's his weakness. He's underestimating you. We hit him while he's still confident before he can destroy evidence or flee the jurisdiction."
Deacon felt the magnitude of the moment settling over him. What happens to us after the arrests? Protective custody until trial. Could be 6 months, could be a year or longer, depending on legal maneuvers. Your lives will be on hold. No work, no normal routines, just waiting for your day in court. Eleanor squeezed Deacon's hand. "I'm sorry. I brought this chaos into your life."
No. We brought it on ourselves by choosing truth over comfort. I'd make the same choice again. Holloway stood signaling the end of the planning phase and the beginning of action. "Agent Morrison will take you to the safe house. Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow, everything changes." But sleep proved impossible. Deacon lay in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar house with FBI agents in the hallway and thought about Zoe, about how he'd explained to his 7-year-old daughter that their life had been upended because he'd stopped to help someone, about whether she'd understand the choice he'd made or whether she'd only see the disruption and fear. At 4:23 a.m., the secure phone the FBI had given him rang. "Deacon, it's Luther." His friend's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "They just arrested Roland Bishop, pulled him out of his house in handcuffs 30 minutes ago. Vincent Nash too. It's all over the police scanner. Half the department is in shock. The other half is relieved someone finally had the courage to do this." "How's it playing?" "Mixed. Roland employed 1/3 of the construction workers in this county. A lot of families are going to suffer when Bishop Construction goes under. But the families of the men who died, they're already calling the station asking if it's true, if they're finally going to get justice. They are. Whatever else happens, they'll get truth." "Yeah, but Deacon Roland lawyered up immediately. Big firm from New York City. They're already filing motions claiming Elena fabricated everything during a mental breakdown. This is going to be a fight. Let them fight. We have evidence that can't be explained away." The call ended. Deacon stared at the ceiling, processing the reality that he'd just helped destroy the economic foundation of his town, that people would lose jobs and homes because of evidence he'd helped deliver to federal prosecutors. But 7 men were dead. 7 families had been lied to, paid off, forced to sign NDAs that protected killers. The math still favored truth over comfort. Morning came with news coverage. Every major outlet in upstate New York led with variations of the same headline: "Prominent police chief arrested in construction death cover-up." The footage showed Roland Bishop in handcuffs, his face a mask of controlled fury, being led into a federal building while reporters shouted questions he ignored. Holloway arrived at the safe house at 9 a.m., looking like she'd slept even less than they had. "We need to move fast. Roland's attorneys are already filing motions to suppress the evidence, claiming the recordings were obtained illegally. We need to go public before they can control the narrative." "Public how?" Elena asked. "Press conference. You, the FBI representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the families of the victims. We tell the complete truth before Roland can bury it in legal technicalities and procedural delays." Deacon thought about Dorothy and Zoe watching this on television, seeing their quiet lives exploded across news coverage. "When?" "Today, 2 p.m. Albany Federal Building. The whole world is going to know your names after this." The press conference room was packed beyond capacity. Reporters from newspapers and television stations, cameras with satellite uplinks, journalists who'd driven from New York City when they heard the scope of the allegations. The families of 7 dead men sat in the front row, their presence a silent testament to years of grief and unanswered questions. Holloway spoke first, outlining the charges with prosecutorial precision, her voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. Then Eleanor stepped to the podium, still in the civilian clothes she'd been wearing since Friday night, looking exhausted and determined, and utterly unwilling to back down. My name is Lieutenant Eleanor Bishop. For the past 9 months, I've been investigating my own father for criminal conspiracy. What I found was a systematic pattern of negligence, corruption, and cover-ups that resulted in 7 preventable workplace deaths. She detailed the evidence methodically. The 47 audio recordings, the falsified coroner's reports, the payments to building inspectors who looked the other way, while safety violations multiplied. The room was silent, except for the scratch of pens on notebooks and the quiet sobbing of Mrs. Kowalski in the front row. I'm here today because 7 men deserve better than the lies their families were given. Because Stefan Kowalski's daughter deserves to know her father didn't die because he was drunk. He died because my father wanted to save $14,000 on scaffolding. Because Dmitry Volkov's wife deserves to know the crane that killed her husband hadn't been properly maintained in 18 months. Elena's voice strengthened, carrying conviction that silenced even the most cynical reporters. And I'm here because when I refused to stay silent, when I insisted on investigating these deaths properly, my own father, a man who swore an oath to protect and serve, ordered someone to kill me. That's who Roland Bishop is beneath the community donations and the public service awards. That's the truth he spent millions trying to bury. The reporters erupted with questions. Holloway let it run for exactly 90 seconds before stepping back to the microphone. We'll take 3 questions. Make them count. A reporter from the Albany Times stood. Is it true that Roland Bishop is claiming his daughter fabricated this evidence during a mental health crisis triggered by PTSD? Holloway's expression could have cut steel. Lieutenant Bishop has been decorated twice for her service to her community. She has 9 months of meticulously documented evidence gathering, all of which has been independently verified by FBI forensic analysts. This isn't the product of mental illness. This is what happens when a dedicated law enforcement officer refuses to look away from corruption, even when that corruption involves her own father. Another reporter. What about the impact on Bishop Construction's employees? Aren't you destroying livelihoods? That's a tragedy. Holloway acknowledged, her voice softening fractionally. But allowing a company built on criminal negligence to continue operating would inevitably result in more deaths. Sometimes justice requires difficult choices. Sometimes protecting future victims means accepting short-term economic disruption. A third reporter stood. Who is the civilian witness mentioned in the arrest warrant? The one who was present during the alleged murder attempt. Before Holloway could deflect, Deacon stepped forward. He hadn't planned to speak publicly, but looking at those families in the front row, families who'd been lied to for years, who'd carried guilt that wasn't theirs, he couldn't stay silent.
My name is Deacon Wright. I'm a mechanic from Millbrook. Last Friday night, I stopped to help Lieutenant Bishop when her patrol car broke down on Route 9. Someone opened fire on us, tried to kill us both because we'd become witnesses to something we weren't supposed to see. His voice steadied, finding strength in purpose. I'm here because I saw firsthand what happens when people choose silence over truth, when they prioritize their own safety over doing what's right. I'm here because my 7-year-old daughter deserves to grow up in a world where powerful people can't murder workers and call it acceptable losses. I'm here because those 7 men, he gestured to the families in the front row, they deserve justice, even if justice costs the rest of us everything we've built. The room erupted. Holloway ended the conference, but the damage to Roland's carefully constructed narrative was complete. The evening news led with Deacon's statement, with footage of Mrs.
Kowalski embracing Elena after the conference, with split-screen images of Roland Bishop in an orange jumpsuit beside the professional photos from his police chief tenure. The trial took 9 months to reach conclusion. Roland's attorneys were exactly as skilled and aggressive as Holloway had predicted. They attacked Elena's credibility relentlessly, suggested the recordings had been doctored by sophisticated audio manipulation, claimed the construction workers who testified were motivated solely by the promise of financial settlements. But the evidence was overwhelming. 47 authenticated audio recordings, coroner's reports that showed systematic falsification when compared to original autopsy findings, financial records that traced payoffs through shell companies across 3 states, testimony from witnesses who described safety violations in such specific detail that no amount of legal maneuvering could explain them away.
The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 17 counts. Roland Bishop was sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Vincent Nash received 18 years. Bishop Construction declared bankruptcy. Within a month, its assets liquidated to fund settlements for the victims' families. 2 years after that night on Route 9, Deacon stood on the porch of his farmhouse watching the sunset over fields he'd thought he might never see again. Dorothy sat in her rocking chair, older now, moving slower but still sharp enough to catch every nuance of the world around her.
Zoe had grown into a 9-year-old with her father's quiet strength and her own fierce sense of justice.
"Daddy, when is Miss Elena coming?"
Zoe called from the doorway.
"Soon, baby. She texted 20 minutes ago. She's almost here."
With the baby. Eleanor's daughter, their daughter, was 6 months old now.
Named Dorothy after the woman who'd taught Deacon that courage sometimes meant standing up when standing down would be easier, that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the comfortable thing. They weren't married. Maybe someday, maybe not. What they had was more complicated than traditional labels could capture, a partnership forged in crisis, tempered by truth, sustained by the knowledge that they'd chosen principle over safety and somehow survived the choosing. Elena's car appeared at the end of the driveway, pulling up slowly. She emerged with the baby in a carrier, looking different than she had that desperate night, steadier, freer, like someone who'd finally put down a weight she'd been carrying for too long. "How was the drive?" "Long, but little Dorothy slept most of it." She kissed him, familiar and warm. "How are you?" "Good." Zoe's been counting down the minutes. They walked inside together, and the farmhouse filled with the sounds of family Zoe's excited chatter about school and friends and the science project she was working on. Dorothy's gentle instructions about supporting the baby's head, Eleanor's laughter at something Deacon said that only she found funny. Later, after dinner and dishes and bedtime routines, after Zoe had finally surrendered to sleep and Dorothy had retired to her room, Deacon and Elena sat on the porch. The baby dozed in her carrier between them, making the small sounds new lives make. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked quietly. "Everything that happened, the trial, the publicity, the year in protective custody, having to explain it all to Zoe?" Deacon thought about the question seriously, considering it from every angle. He thought about the families who'd finally gotten truth after years of lies, about the safety regulations that had been strengthened because of the investigation, about the workers at other construction companies who were alive because Roland Bishop's crimes had exposed systemic negligence across the industry. He thought about Zoe, both his daughters now growing up in a world where they'd seen their father choose principle over comfort, justice over silence. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret doing the right thing. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 7 men had to die before anyone had the courage to investigate. But I don't regret stopping on that road. I don't regret helping you. I don't regret any of it." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping that night, for trusting me with your safety, for all of it. Thank you for trusting me with the truth." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, as the November air grew cold enough to see their breath. Inside, Dorothy began humming an old hymn. The baby stirred and settled. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. These were the sounds of a life rebuilt from crisis. A life that would never be simple or easy, but would always be honest. And in the end, honesty mattered more than comfort. Deacon looked out at the farmhouse property he'd bought 8 years ago as a refuge from a world that often felt hostile. It had been breached, invaded, transformed by events he couldn't have anticipated when he made that choice on a dark road. But it was still standing, still home. And maybe that was the real lesson, not that safety could be guaranteed, but that standing for truth, even when it shattered your carefully constructed sanctuary, was the only way to build something worth protecting, worth defending, worth everything.